Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. You can support WitchLit and the serious book habit it requires at ko-fi.com/WitchLitPodcast. And you can be part of the show by sending in your own death, sex, religion, politics, money questions for our guests to victoria@witchlitpod.com. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and give us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help other witches find the show. Here's to never getting to the bottom of our to-be-read piles. Stacey Williams-Ng is a multidisciplinary artist and writer from Memphis, Tennessee. She is a former graphic design instructor and children's book art director, but has found a rewarding new home in making tarot and oracle decks. Her first Kickstarter campaign for the Southern Gothic Oracle deck was fully funded in its first day and is now in its third edition. Her second deck, the Southern Botanic Oracle, explores similar themes and is out now. She is currently working on 2 tarot decks, an indie deck to be released in 2023 and a folklore tarot for U.S. games to be released the following year. Stacey Williams-Ng, welcome to WitchLit.
Thanks, Victoria. It's so awesome to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. We got to do our little chit chat before, and you already know that. But it's nice to have someone on who's doing something a little bit different from what, most of the folks we've talked to. So our first question for everyone is, why write?
Well, I know, because I listened to your podcast and I was like, oh my God, am I the first non-author? What am I going to do with the why write question? But the thing is, I love writing, and this creating these oracle decks was a writing project in a way. I would rather answer the question, why tell stories? Because that's what writers do. But I just tell stories differently, right? So I'm a visual storyteller, and I use words also. I put them together because I think that the dichotomy of words and image, I used to be a design instructor. You even said that in the intro, right? And when I would teach design, that was my shtick. It was all about visual storytelling, teaching design students how to, that old adage, like a picture is worth 1,000 words. I would always say that's bullshit. You look at a picture of, a cardboard box. Can you really come up with 1,000 words for that? I bet you can't. Right. And so I would say, a good picture is worth 1,000 words. Sure. Even better would be a really good picture and a couple of words to sort of be a prompt. And that's where I found my home in oracle cards, because it's a picture with a couple of words. It's pretty great.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for those who haven't seen Stacey's decks, each card has 2 keywords at the bottom to kind of give you a place to jump off from the image. But I do like the booklets that come with the decks. I love the storytelling in those, especially the haunts for the Southern for the Southern Gothic Oracle, like that, just those folklore ghost stories around the haunt cards. And I also downloaded and went through your shadow work plan with the decks. And I really like how you put that together, this idea of kind of selecting a few cards from each deck to make a deck to do shadow work. Do you want to talk about those a little bit, since those are kind of the more writing aspects of the work of the decks?
I'm so glad you did that. I really enjoyed that process. Because now, I'm in a new phase of this project. I'm teaching people how to use the deck, right? Because I went from this very intense time of making it, and now I'm doing this intense time of sort of eating my own medicine, right? I have to now use the deck and see if it works as well as I wanted it to. So the project you're talking about is, I've been doing these downloadable PDF spreads for people to work with, and right around what I'll call shadow season, right? Halloween and the holidays and the lessening of the light, right? I did this shadow work thing. The Haunts, for those of you who don't know, is an expansion pack that I did to go with the Southern Gothic Oracle. The Southern Gothic Oracle is already a little darker than most Oracle decks you're probably used to. It's pretty edgy. But I wanted to really push that envelope a lot further and have some really dark cards. Like, oh, you thought that was dark? Get these 9 more cards and it'll really mess you up. And what I did was I got 9. The reason it's called the Haunts, and you'll appreciate this being from East Tennessee, I really wanted to call it the Haints, but I didn't.
Yes.
The Haunts are 9 cards that feature like legends from the South. So there's Mothman, there's the Bride of Annandale, there's the Boo Hag, who's kind of like a boogeyman on the coast in the coastal South. And each one of those represents like a really dark idea, like jealousy or dangerous urges or greed or ego. And so if you pull a card like that, when you're like doing a spread on what's standing in your way, right? And you pull something that's like toxic nostalgia, it's highly specific and pretty upsetting. I've even had this, like, I've attacked myself with these cards because, I make the cards and then I'll do a reading on it. And I'm like, damn.
They're spicy. They're spicy. They are spicy.
They are definitely spicy. But I think it was all based on, and the exercises, because I'll get to that in a minute, but to answer your question, you take the darkest cards from each of the 2 decks, leave all the positivity behind, right? And then you shuffle all these very semi-frightening cards, like the Hellhound, and you're taking these cards, which you're holding in your hand only the dark messages. And then the spreads are designed to help you get through that. So people already do this with tarot. There are plenty of exercises. If any of you listening are tarot readers or tarot makers, a lot of times you separate out the court cards to do work on like family relationships. Sometimes you separate the major arcana or something like that. In this case, I'm saying separate out all these very dark cards. And that way, everything you pull is going to be negative, and you do these spreads that are meant to explore things that might be troubling you. So you might do an exercise that's about childhood trauma and say, what is something I've forgotten from my childhood that I haven't addressed yet? And then you pull a card like dangerous urges, right? And then you're like, oh, and then you react to that. And so all of these exercises are meant to be cathartic. And that's why I tried to use language in these worksheets that were like, take your time with this, just, react to it in the way that is right for you. But yeah, I'm not saying my whole deck is like that. I just have some spicy cards and I wanted to help people use them in a way that's productive and is not terribly upsetting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think though, like you said, the themes of the haunt cards and some of the cards in the Southern Gothic Oracle deck are dark and they are a little scary, but and this maybe is a weird thing to say, but I feel like they're softened by the artwork because your artwork has this kind of like luscious dream-like quality to it. So there's this, yes, the image is dark, but you can kind of see that, it serves a purpose, I guess. And I think the art kind of reflects that in a way.
Yeah. Even Pearl Bryan, the headless woman.
Yeah, it's funny. I pulled that. Yeah, I pulled that card. I was telling Stacey before we started that I've been using the Southern Gothic Oracle deck as kind of my homesickness deck as my card a day, and I pulled the Headless Woman card right around Halloween, and I was like, okay, what is the message here? So.
Yeah, that card, I call it the Headless Woman, or I call it Pearl Bryan, but the card is actually called Crimes of Passion. Mm-hmm. And it's a story of Kentucky's famous ghost, the ghost of Pearl Bryan, who was beheaded by her horrific boyfriend. So I made the lesson of the card about, toxic love affairs, toxic, it could be misogyny. There's a lot of different things that people read into it, but it's basically about when bad boyfriends go wrong. Yeah.
Well, it also made me think of this whole tradition that came from England and Scotland and Ireland of the murder ballad. Because, there's in East Tennessee, there's the Knoxville Girl song.
Murder ballads.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, this is like also this dark creative energy too. Like, I think this card also can represent that, like this dark creative energy. So
that's a great interpretation. Yeah. And the thing is, when I was doing, I kept these as an expansion pack on purpose because I don't want people, not everybody wants that kind of card reading.
right.
And you can see that just from common sense when you look at other oracle decks. So many of them are fairies and butterflies and flowers. You know, I think that the audience, by and large, is looking for what you might also call affirmation cards.
Mm-hmm.
So to make a deck that is that dark, I felt like might be off-putting for some people. So I really tried to package those in a way that was really clear. Like these are shadow cards and there's monsters, you know. And true enough, many people buy them, but everyone who owns the Southern Gothic Oracle doesn't come back for that. And that's cool. That's why I separated them out, you know?
Yeah. Oh no, they immediately spoke to my, gothy Scorpio nature. So.
I love it. You're my people, Victoria.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things I think is interesting, because you did Kickstarters for both these decks. And so I think a lot of people who do Oracle and Tarot decks, usually they split the work between an artist and a writer, or, to interpret the deck. And you did all of that work. So do you want to talk about that process and what that was like from like, I'm going to make an Oracle deck and I'm going to do all the work and I'm going to publish it myself?
Thank you for being the first person to acknowledge that. that is some, if you knew me before this, that is some serious Stacey shit right there. I'm a major Sagittarius. Like I have it in all the houses. I'm a Sagittarius stellium or whatever they call it. But I do all of the things. And, I'm 50 now. And when I look back at my creative, because I've always been a professional creative, but I've jumped around a lot. And I used to really beat myself up in my 30s for not like picking a line and staying with it. I was a painter as a kid. I always would draw and paint. And that's always been like my religion, honestly. It's like my spiritual path is making things. And so that is just me. And so that's why I assumed I would go to art school. But then I went to graphic design school because my parents were like, you got to make money. So I thought that I had to stick to graphic design and give up painting. And then I was in graphic design for many years. And then, when I started going into painting, I would also think, oh, I have to give up graphic design and really like focus on my painting career. And that's the message that people are still giving young people, which I really think, looking back now that I'm middle-aged, I look back and I'm like, I love the fact that I tried a lot of things. I really do. And I wouldn't change a thing. I might change what I did, but I wouldn't change to that, monochromatic path that was being laid out for me. Like you need to be a specialist of some kind or whatever, because now I can do the graphic design and I can write and I can paint and I can do something that other people would find really difficult. To do a whole Oracle deck and to write it and to lay it out and to launch it is because I've been in several different kinds of jobs where I had to do things like that. And so I was able to bring all those different skills to bear and I loved it. I love being able to do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is interesting. It's funny you say that. My sister, I'm also 50, by the way. So yay for us. Trying new things in our middle age. But yeah, my sister also kind of went through that. She's a painter and went to art school, but did graphic design and now works in IT, like this totally left of whatever she started out in. But I do think there is this message. And I mean, it came up for me, doing grad school and as a creative writer. I mean, I did MAs in English thinking I was going to be an English professor and not an author. And I didn't really want to be an English professor. So yeah, I mean, I do think we could give people this idea that no, you have to do this thing and you have to do it to make money. This is your one existence on this planet is to make money, whatever you do. And which I think also makes people turn, their passion into a side hustle instead of like something that feeds them in a more spiritual way. So yeah, I totally agree. Totally.
I have a totally different answer to the same question. I'm going to run with it because I think you'll like this.
Yeah, no, I think it's good.
The other thing I'm thinking is, so I used to do children's books, right? And I had a small imprint called Little Bahalia Publishing, which was also kind of a nod to the South. And when I went to the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators is this very awkward title, but basically it's this really amazing group of children's books producers, both on the writing side and the illustrating side. And they always have this conference in New York City every year. And I remember being in Manhattan at this conference, trying to soak in everything I could, right, about children's book publishing. And I would mostly go to the illustrator events. And one of the things that someone said, she was the art director of Simon & Schuster. And she said, if you want to be the author illustrator of a children's book, you have to be an illustrator first. Because she said, if you are a great painter and you write a semi-lousy book, there are editors out there that can fix it. They will give you, the editor at Simon & Schuster or any other great imprint will help you through your book about a snowman, even if it's a dreadful book. But if it's painted beautifully, that's what the kids care about. Mm-hmm. And she said, but the other way doesn't apply. If you wrote a brilliant story about a snowman, please don't paint your own pictures if you're not a professional artist, because nobody can fix it. And that really stuck with me. I was like, oh my God, I have to lead with visual storytelling. And I've taken that lesson all the way into this esoteric work I'm doing when I get all torn up about the entry of a card, or about, like in tarot, how am I going to interpret the Eight of Wands or what have you. I just remember that I need to lead with the imagery. That is my strength. That's what I know I can do. And I do the image first and then the words come.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting you say that. And I think that person at the thing was right. I mean, it's a lot easier to edit than tell someone their art is bad. I mean, it's a lot easier conversation to have. But been thinking about, like, in the companion books, like, there's so much detail because you are drawing on, like, the folklore and the traditions of the South in the first two decks. And so I'm just saying, like, I know growing up in the South, you get steeped in this stuff, but I also can tell you've done a lot of research on these things too. So how did you, like, jump into that part of it, just like compiling this information and deciding what was going to go in and what wasn't going to go in? Did that lead with image too? Or did you kind of think, I want to tell this story and I'm going to paint it?
I led with story in my planning process. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing that I think people might be surprised to know about an oracle artist like me, is that I prefer tarot cards in my real life. If I'm going to do a reading, I've never actually liked, you probably already picked that up when I said it before about how a lot of them are affirmation cards. Mm-hmm. I've never been super fond of oracle decks. I'm much more fond of tarot in terms of doing a really meaningful reading. However, when it came time when I finally had the idea that, like, I think I can do this, I think I can make a deck of cards, I immediately wanted a blank slate. I didn't want to start with, okay, fill in the blanks. This is what the Empress is going to have to be. And this is what I wanted to just have a complete blank slate and say, I want to create, like, a whole divination system. It's ambitious, but that's what was really feeding my soul. I was like, I love the idea of not having to shoehorn, which I am doing now. So I don't mean to make it sound negative. Like, right now for US Games, I am making a Southern Folklore tarot deck, and I feel like I'm ready only because I've gotten this other thing out of my system. And now I'm ready to come back from a perspective. But when I first embarked on this, I was too excited about all the things I wanted to say. And I felt like I had so much pouring out of me. A blank sheet of paper was better. Right. So I started with writing, and I would just try to think of, like, if I was on a walk and I saw, like, the raccoon came from a walk. I was just on a walk and spotted a raccoon and was like, oh, there should be a raccoon card. I mean, raccoons are not, unique to the American South. However, I think there are a lot of jokes about them, and they just feature in a lot of our folklore and imagery and goofy, this kind of imagery you see in things. And I thought, I think that would be really familiar to people from here, and so on. A pair of shoes could be like my equivalent of a lover's card, because a pair of shoes could be like the way they're used in hoodoo practices. Mm-hmm. So for foot track magic. And I was doing it that way. I would start with the object instead of starting with the lover's card and saying, wouldn't it be fun for the lover's card to have a pair of shoes? I started with a pair of shoes and what I really wanted to say. And so you'll see that in a lot of the cards, like somebody might compare that to the lover's card, or somebody might compare, I don't know, the alligator to the hermit in tarot, but I didn't start with hermit, right? I started with the alligator. It gave me a lot more creative space.
Yeah, I like that. So how did you decide on the haunts? How did you narrow that down to the one? I mean, the South is lousy with ghost stories and legends. So how did you narrow that down?
Well, first of all, I don't want to narrow it. I'm thinking I might like to do a whole book about them because there's so many books of them already, and nobody ever gets tired of these books. No. If you go to any used bookstore around here, there's a whole bunch of like the ghosts of Savannah, the monsters of Appalachia, and all this. I made up those titles, but I'm sure they exist.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they do.
Like you said, we're just lousy with them down here. But yeah, I wanted to I started with feelings. I started with these negative ideas or negative impulses that I wanted to bring through divination, like jealousy, like ego. And then I was just going through and Googling and researching and, going to like used bookstores. And I have a whole bunch of like 1980s books on ghosts. They're really fun. And I found these big categories that I really wanted to avoid. This actually led to a really fun process of how do I avoid the Lady in the Lake story? Like there's so many, I think, again, it comes from like Scots-Irish traditions of these tragic women. I ended up with Pearl Bryan, our headless woman, but there were too many of these like women in a white dress that cross the lake every night at midnight. There's like 10 bazillion versions of that story. And it's so tiresome and it's so misogynistic. I just hate everything about those stories. And then the other category are what I'll call the dead slave stories. And I ended up including one of those as well. And it was just like, and I'm using insensitive language on purpose because that's exactly how they're always portrayed. These people are nameless. It's always like that slave girl. It's just horrible. It's atrocious. And then it'll be something like they died. The ghost story always includes why the ghost is mad. You know what I mean? It's like the ghost haunts because, she misses her boyfriend, or the ghost came back because she was murdered by her boss, whatever. As if anyone who were enslaved would be mad about that one thing. You know what I mean? Like it was they're all so petty and so horrible. And it's like you not only exploited this person to the point of unbelievable extremes in life by basically dehumanizing them in every sense. Now you're going to do this in perpetuity after they've died with such insensitivity. So anyway, this could be its own podcast, but I just feel...
Yes, they could. It probably is.
I'll try
somewhere.
to cut it out. I'll try and cut it off. But basically, I was finding categories of what the ghost stories told us about how we see people here in the South, or how we conversely don't see people, like underrepresented people, like women, like minorities, like quote unquote Indians. Like there are just some really insensitive stories out there. And so I wanted to deal with that, but also just make my oracle deck in a way that was authentic to the kinds of stories we tell down here, but also didn't continue the exploitation.
Yeah. No, I think that's, I think that's good for people to know, because I do think there is, we know, the other part of being a Southerner is what is that, it's why I like bitter Southerner. It's, we know our history is problematic. We know all those things. And part of that is dealing with it out in the open, I think. And so I'm glad you added that into the conversation. So now that you are working on a tarot deck, does the storytelling for that look different to you? Is your research and kind of how you're approaching that different than with the oracle decks? It's
so different. It's backwards, because the meaning is already there. So now I have to go find something. That's why I use the term shoehorn for. It's like, okay, lovers can't do pair of shoes. So I'm going to go find something and put it in this hole. And some of them are jumping out at me as being just so amazing. Like for the Hierophant, of course, I'm going to have a preacher. Like, come on, it's got to be like a sweaty faced preacher. I grew up evangelical, so there are some like really heavy trigger memories that I have to pull out for this deck. And so some of them are just like writing themselves. Like the Chariot is probably either going to be like a really kick-ass Cadillac or an old truck. Like it doesn't matter. Either way, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of fodder there. But for so many others, I'm really having to dig pretty deep, because I want it to check all the boxes. I want every single card to have strong tarot symbolism, because I know there are a lot of themed tarot decks out there. Well, first of all, there's just a lot of themed tarot decks out there. They're just ridiculous. Everything you can think of. I mean, there's a gummy bear tarot, for God's sake. So if I haven't seen it, so no offense if that person's listening, but come on.
I have seen it. I've actually seen people read professionally with it at a fair. Yeah.
Wow. I think I'm just too old. I'm too goth and I'm too old. But basically, I guess what I'm saying is sometimes when they have heavy themes, the tarot meaning is lost and it ends up just being a deck of 78 beautiful art cards. And I understand plenty of collectors are okay with that and would be happy to just collect a beautiful deck of 78 art cards. But I do want it to function as a real tarot. I want it to function for people's very personal, very spiritual readings and not just be about the pictures of the art. They don't even need to know who made it. I'd rather they get a better reading out of it than know who I am. So that's why I need to sort of make sure that I'm doing my research and understanding what the Rider-Waite did with each and every card and what the Thoth deck, what Aleister Crowley and et cetera did with their deck, so that I can see what the Marseille deck, like what are the big themes people are looking for without just doing a rip-off of Rider-Waite-Smith. I want it to be completely new, but still sort of check the boxes of what people recognize in a sun card or a moon card, et cetera. But it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, process. It is. Yeah, and I would assume it would have to be, just because you're right. There's so much like historical theming that goes into that. I mean, the Pamela and Coleman Smith deck, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is iconic. I mean, it just shows up everywhere. It's, and people have, are still writing books about the layers of meaning in those cards. Mm-hmm. So I think it seems like it's a pretty deep river to step into. So.
Yeah. And my cards, to be fair, I mean, there are tarot makers who do such a better job at hitting all the boxes. And the person I'm thinking of is, of course, Benabel Wen. I mean, Benabel is such an amazing researcher and scholar. Her book on tarot is this big. It's bigger than the Quran. It's bigger than the Bible. It's enormous and it's thick like molasses to read it, because she's so smart. So when she's doing a deck, it's really, really rich with lots of symbolism. I'm not going that far. I'm not trying to prove anything as a researcher or try. There's a place for that. And my job, I think, is to bring out Southern folklore, to bring out, you're really my ideal audience, honestly, Victoria, because I think about a lot of people who are displaced Southerners, will write to me and be like, oh, I live in Illinois now, but I grew up in Arkansas. Yeah, I get a lot of that in the feedback and in the reviews I get. And this really reminds me of my Mema's house, or this reminds me of my childhood. Or Nancy Hendrickson, who wrote the Ancestral Tarot and now the Ancestral Grimoire. We haven't met in person yet, but we've made friends online during COVID. And I'm really looking forward to meeting her in real life one day. But her books talk about, using regional card decks. She doesn't use mine as an example because we didn't know each other yet. But when she wrote the book, she was using examples of like African tarot, Hoodoo tarot, Mexican themed tarot. If you have an ancestry along those lines, then you can sort of more authentically tap into your culture. Now, my deck is multicultural. It's regional. It's not unique to a race of people, so to speak, but it's unique to people who have this shared folklore in this region of the world. And so I hope that it touches a lot of different people from different walks of life who've grown up in these 10 or 11 states.
Yeah. I had the cornbread card on my altar for Halloween because it's my grandmother. It's my grandmother and my mother. I mean, I have my grandmother's cast iron skillet. I mean, that to me is like definitely ancestral. So that's
great. Yeah, that wedge. I mean, I painted it from my grandmother's wedge skillet, so it's very real on this side too. It was made from a real skillet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how those things, it's those tiny things I think that build meaning for all of us. So that makes sense to me that like having something that is closer to, where you're from, where you grew up, where your people are, whatever, that makes sense to me that those cards could pack more meaning. So I'm looking forward to the tarot deck. I can't wait.
Yay.
Yeah, that is very, so, but you're working on 2 separate projects, right?
I am. So the one that I'm doing for US Games is very similar. It's a true extension of Southern Gothic Oracle. I mean, they even wanted to call it the Southern Gothic Tarot, but I was like, no, we can't. Like that would be too confusing for people, and I just don't think that'll work. So it has its own name, but it is very much a continuation of that. It's hand painted. It's written by me, and it includes all this great Southern magic and folklore. New images, though. I do have Easter eggs in there. I want to drop in things like the kudzu and the cornbread and all that, but it won't be the same picture. It'll be a whole new image. But people who own the Southern Gothic Oracle will be like, oh, there it is.
I recognize that.
That's what I hope. I know that. But the other one I'm doing is actually completely left of center, has nothing whatsoever to do with the South or painting. I'm actually going to do photo collages for this one. And I'm not the writer for this one. My buddy Sam is the writer. He's a poet. And he wants to do something that is like he's really into zines. He's always collected zines. He's very punk. And he has collected these like punk zines, feminist zines, all these great, he goes to the zine conventions. He really did, 20 years ago, a lot, because they were much more prevalent 20 years ago, coming out of the 90s. And so he wanted to do a zine style tarot. And so I'm the illustrator for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we're calling it the Rocket Punch Tarot.
Nice.
And it's going to be, I haven't even put it on my social media yet. Maybe by the time this is out, I will have, but I don't even know yet how to talk about it, because it's such a it's such a departure from what I've been doing. It's exciting.
Yeah, no, it sounds exciting. And yeah, I mean, that hits in my, my wheelhouse too. So that's pretty cool. And I do think it's funny. Zines are having a comeback. They're hot again. And I love just that, in this age of, Kickstarter and digital tools and all this stuff, if we're like re-embracing that to make zines in this kind of digital world and in a whole totally different way. So that's exciting. Wow.
It's so much easier on the iPad. Oh my God. And when I think about like it was so funny when Sam and I were having coffee and talking about doing this project together about a year ago. He was like, have you ever seen like a 90s feminist, whatever? And I'm just laughing because he's younger than we are. And I was like, gosh, Sam, if only we knew someone who went to graphic design school in the 90s who was a feminist.
Nice.
I was like, oh my God. I'm just so excited because he was probably in diapers in the 90s. And I was like, ding.
I was here for that.
It's taking me back to my college days. I was like, man, I used to subscribe to Ray Gun. Shut up.
Nice. So, perfect. So are you going to Kickstarter this one, or what's the plan for publishing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Kickstarter is a great platform.
So how has that worked?
Reach people. No, go ahead. What's your question?
I was going to say, how has that worked for you? Like making the decision to do this on Kickstarter and then getting that out and getting the word out. I mean, you've gotten funded both times and then some, so clearly it's worked well. So do you have any words of wisdom for people, I guess, too?
Well, that's what, nobody was more surprised than me. So you have to understand, I have to set the stage here. When I did Kickstarter for the Southern Gothic Oracle, I was absolutely no one. I mean, I'm still not that I'm anyone now, but I mean, I was really, really no one. At least people follow my Instagram now. I was absolutely no one, coming from a completely different career. I mean, I was a practicing magical person. I don't know if I want to use the word witch. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But,
understandable.
Yeah. But I definitely, had my own esoteric practice, but was very much in the closet about it. It was extremely intimate and personal to me. And it was not something I could ever bring up at work. It was not something I could bring up with the evangelical family. It was something that was just extremely personal. So to say that I was not in the community is an understatement. I was a complete outsider. And I was basically coming at this. I knew that I knew what I was talking about. I knew that my research was solid, but nobody else has ever heard of me. So I'm going to launch this entirely just as an illustrator. Like, maybe you'll like how this looks. I'm just going to try it out. And when you're actually doing the drop-down menu and you're setting up your Kickstarter, you can choose 15 days, 30 days, 45 days, whatever. And I thought, God, 15 days is not nearly enough for me to find enough people to back this campaign. I doubt I can even do it in 30 days because it's going to be all strangers. Nobody I know really would be into this except maybe 5 people. So I'm like, this is entirely a wing and a prayer. So I'm going to do 45 days. The whole thing gets funded on day 1. Yeah. And I'm just like, what? Like, I thought that I would have to do all that work. Like, you read all these, I read all these articles about like how to do a Kickstarter campaign. Be sure and send an email to everyone you know and da 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 da. And literally, I was going to do that, but I didn't. I just launched it, and total strangers backed the deck. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep for the next 2 nights. And that's why I say it's such a great platform, because there are already, I've learned now in hindsight, I can see this, but at the time, it didn't occur to me that it was anything more than just, a software platform, but it's actually, it's a website that people go to. They already are looking for cool stuff to back. Collectors go there, trolling the lists of things that they're going to buy next. I didn't know that yet. And so I was able to reach all new people, and it was really awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I can see the rabbit hole of my becoming a hoarder of tarot and oracle decks. So in order to fence that off, I only get stuff off Kickstarter. I only back Kickstarter decks. And like one of the first ones I backed was like a major arcana only deck done by some grad students at UT. That was like the grad student oracle or grad student major arcana and tarot of just like the hell of grad school. I was just interested because
did you go to UTK?
I did go to UTK for grad school. Yeah. So it was like, oh, it hit my, oh yeah, it's a creative person at UTK and that hell of grad school experience. So yeah. But yeah, I think that, Kickstarter for those things is great. And, I've interviewed folks on the show who've done their books through Kickstarter. And I always thought that was like an uphill slog. But I think once you hit whatever that zeitgeist is on Kickstarter, there's like a weird magic there that happens, which is nice.
Yeah. So I was very grateful for that. So I did that, and then I did it again with Botanic, and I'm going to do it again with Rocket Punch. Mm-hmm. I want to eventually wean myself off of Kickstarter so that it's something where, I can just use my own platform. Mm-hmm. But, until I can justify that, why wouldn't I use Kickstarter? Because that's the best way to find people. Yeah. If people are there looking for the kind of thing that I want to give them, then that's a great matchmaking tool.
Yeah. That makes sense. I'm curious, you touched on this, and if you don't want to talk about it, you can say pass, because we are a no rules podcast. But growing up evangelical in the South, I mean, my parents both identified as Christian, but my dad was a Lutheran, and that's complicated in the South. But to make that transition to magical practice, witchcraft, hoodoo, whatever you want to call it. And because I do think that it's really easy to pick a label and pick the wrong one for other people. So I tend not to do that. But like how do you think that shows up in your work?
Oh boy. I'd say the things that people don't know about me that are going to be so obvious once you know them and you look at my work would be that I grew up evangelical, fully believing all that stuff, completely eyeball deep in Bible drill and Bible camp. And we even had like a fake Girl Scouts that was called Girls in Action because, you know, you can't be in secular Girl Scouts. That would be satanic. I knew kids that weren't allowed, forget Halloween. Like they definitely weren't allowed to talk about Halloween or enjoy Halloween because that's the devil's holiday. They also couldn't do Santa. There was a girl in my 6th grade class whose mother told her that Santa was an anagram for Satan. Like, it's just like, that was my reality. It was like the deep, crazy, culty evangelical. Okay. And that did not survive my childhood. So I've spent my whole adult life away from it, but I was emerging out of it during college because I went to art school and I was around all these amazing open-minded people, thank God. And I was slowly getting my eyes opened. But the other thing that really defines me, not just as an artist, but as a person, would be the loss of my father, the unexpected loss of my father. My father dropped dead at age 59, and I was an only child. And when I lost him, like my whole world just shattered. I was so close to Dad. You know, he had been softball coach. He was a stay-at-home dad. He was really cool. Despite the whole evangelical thing, I had a really cool dad. And he disappeared from my life. And so I started just like seeking. I just went on this whole, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what's going on. I don't know when I'm going to die. You know, suddenly, even at 21, you're aware of your mortality. And I ran away. I ran away from Memphis. And I've been gone. I only just moved back 2 years ago. I've been gone 25 years. And I purposely lifted myself up and put myself elsewhere. I went on a free trip to France through a scholarship. And I tried to stay in France. I tried to find ways to stay there. Then I fell in love with a boy from Singapore, ran off and got married, lived in Singapore. When I say I ran away, I like fucking ran away. We're talking about really ran away. I was almost going to change my name. Like I was that hurt and confused about what was even this life. And so I went through a really cathartic period in my early 20s where I was just questioning every single thing. And living in Asia, I was also just really different. People couldn't even understand my accent or anything. So I had to just really reinvent myself a lot. But by being far away from my ancestral homeland, it made me sort of semi-obsessed with Southern culture. So I've spent all these adult years reading Southern Gothic literature, studying the history of the South, trying to come to terms with colonialism and why that happened and what happened and all the things we didn't learn in school. And that has enriched my life in ways that I can't even articulate. I think I kind of articulated it in the Southern Gothic Oracle, but that's the ultimate result of me obsessing about Southern history and what all that even meant. What did I even come from? What happened with this evangelical movement? What happened with the slave trade? Like big questions. But I think you can only do that. At least I know I can only speak for myself. I could only do that from a distance. I had to be far, far, far away, looking in from the outside to do that.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's been a thing for me too. I've always joked that I have an escape velocity from the South, from Tennessee specifically, as I've, moved to Slovenia in college. I moved to Washington State. I moved to British Columbia. Now I'm in California and I keep going back for some reason. But yeah, it's that same, like looking at it from a distance, it's easier to get perspective on things than being in the middle of it and kind of like, I don't know if it's the humidity or the politics, but it's sometimes hard to wrestle with it when you're there. So.
Is it the real snakes or is it the politicians that just seem like them? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but yeah, I think that I mean, it very much. I did not marry someone from Singapore. I married somebody from Trinidad. But yeah, same kind of.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
we have a lot in common.
Yeah, same kind of like, how far away can I get from this place? So,
right, and yet I still love it so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, one of your other interviews with Via Hedera, whose book I love, she's in my bibliography. You guys talked about like the ugliness and the beauty. I think it was Via herself said that the past is both beautiful and ugly, or something like that. Now I'm butchering it. I hate myself for that because I really like her. But that's so true. Like I know it's ugly. I'm willing to face head on how ugly it was, no matter how hard it is to look at. And I really want to just make a better future. We can only live in the present. So, but the more I dig into that painful past, the more I feel like I can. It's that bitter Southerner thing, right? It's trying to forge a better future.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I find it easier to move forward having had those conversations and made those confrontations with the past than just pretending like it's not real. Like, to me, that's not really moving forward.
No, you kind of have to walk through that mud.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's rewarding in its own way to kind of to do that just for yourself, let alone like the interpersonal community we're trying to build together. But I think for yourself, even, it's powerful to go, the things I came from are not pretty. Like there's like, like Via said, there is beauty in who we are and where we came from, but there's also like, the struggle and the cruelty and all of those things that were part of that too. And, how do I take those things and like, beat that sword into a plowshare moving forward kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most valuable lessons from ancestor work and ancestor research. People like Nancy Hendrickson, who wrote the books I told you about, they almost inevitably deal within their opening chapters. They will talk about like, you probably have thought you don't want to talk to your ancestors because you come from such an ugly past or something. And I always think I always call that the white people paragraph because, it's like we're the parents or children of serial killers. It's not even like that. We kind of are. And so, you basically don't want to address that side of yourself, or you don't want to you would never want to commune. You wouldn't want to have dinner with that person, far less have them be on your ancestral spirit team, So usually I find that those paragraphs are really helpful for someone like me because they'll reassure me that you can find ancestors in a lot of places, that you come from tens of thousands, you come from hundreds of thousands. You don't just come from those 19th century monsters or those 18th century monsters. There are plenty of other ancestors to choose from.
Yeah.
Or even just the monsters from the 1950s. Like, we got plenty of monsters.
Yeah.
And just don't talk to them. Talk to someone else, or talk to someone who isn't your blood relative, but someone you admire. Draw lessons from people that you do see as role models, and don't draw from the ones you don't.
Yeah, I think the ancestors of culture and ideas and creativity, like, to me, like, yeah, there's some ugly in there too. There's some ugly in there too, but that could be really freeing. I think if your direct ancestral line is not a place you want to hang out. I mean, I think for a lot of people that can be a refuge, or for people who don't know. I mean, there are a lot of folks who just don't know where they come from, who those people even were for them. So I think, I don't know, I love that ancestor place and idea a lot too.
Yeah.
But we have talked about your upcoming projects, but before we get to our game of chance question, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find your stuff and you on socials and all that good stuff. So.
Oh, sure. So on Instagram, it's Southern Gothic Oracle, but it's separated by underscores because it was such a mouthful. So Southern _Gothic _Oracle. And I talk about the Southern Botanic there as well. And I also have an artist page that is my name, which is Stacey Williams-Ng. That's my Singaporean husband's last name. It's spelled NG, no vowels in it. So I'm at Stacey Williams-Ng, and yeah, that's the best place to see other things I'm working on. One is like one product or one, product family, and the other one is me more as an actual creative.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And we'll put links to all that in the show notes. And
thank you.
So for our last question, you listen to the show, so I'm a roll this lovely die. And depending on what I roll, you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. All those things, as good Southerners, we were raised never to talk about in plain company. That is now my stock and trade, is to talk about those things in public. So, and if you get one you don't want to talk about, you can pass and we can roll again. So, the 3, religion. Not that we didn't already talk about that a little bit.
We did already talk about it, but I could go harder.
Well, we can go harder. This one kind of starts with more of a thought experiment on esoteric practice. Let's put it that way. So sometime in the distant future, when you have moved on to whatever comes next, if someone wanted to summon Stacey Williams-Ng to talk to you of an ancestor of ideas or creativity, what would they need in their summoning circle to bring you?
Oh, turpentine. Absolutely. There is nothing more wonderful to me than the smell of turpentine. It's the art school smell. And I have been doing a lot of digital illustration lately. And, I recently over the Christmas holidays, I set up my studio again because I had put it all away. So I could just, have a cleaner studio, quote unquote. And then I would, be doing all these illustrations on the iPad. And then I was like, no, I'm getting too tight on the iPad. I just need to go back to painting. I don't know what's wrong with me. I've got to do this. So I set up my old crusty easel. It's literally crusty. It's covered with like crusts of old paint from paintings past. My crusty easel and everything. And as soon as I opened the thing of turpentine for my brushes, I wept. I actually wept. Like, I know that sounds really overwrought, but anybody who's been to art school knows, like, even when you get out of the elevator on whatever floor they're doing painting on, as soon as that elevator door opens, it's just this overwhelming smell of linseed oil and turpentine. So that's me. Yeah. I'll come running every time.
And just open the turpentine. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since we're here, let's go hard. So what has it been like now that you have your real name attached to things that are outside what evangelicals might want to talk about and let it exist even? So what's that like?
Yeah, because I remember you talked with Storm about like making your own name, right? I didn't do that. I kind of wish I had now. It's kind of a lot. Like, so I guess the funniest story would be just in general, trying to picture my mom, who's now 85. She's an 85-year-old Southern Baptist. And you have to understand, this is a woman who counts the money at her church because she is like the Baptistiest of all the Baptists. And I moved back to Memphis, mostly because I want to be near her to care for her. But I didn't necessarily want her to ever see an altar. I didn't ever want her to know I read tarot cards, ever. I just don't want to deal with it. I don't want her, not because I'm scared of my mom. I'm not a teenager anymore, but I know that she sees the world through one lens and one lens only. And, the kind of lady who goes to Walmart and thinks that the parking spot she got was granted by Jesus in that moment. Like, she thinks he has nothing better to do than get her a parking spot at Walmart, is not going to take well to the fact that her daughter is not just reading, but manufacturing tarot cards for the next generation. So mom needed to move in with me for her own health reasons. And so I've got Betty Jane living in the house. And I have these books, by authors that you have interviewed prominently on the shelf. I have candles. This was a lot easier when I was 600 miles away. Okay, so now she's there. And, asking some questions. And even seeing a picture of her late husband on what is very obviously a religious altar was very hard for her. She asked me one day, Stacey, are you worshiping your daddy? It's funny and it's not funny, but it's like, no, Mom, I'm not worshiping Dad. Okay, it's called veneration, and it's in the Bible. You're supposed to honor your ancestors. So there's just been things that have been really hard for her to digest. But you know what? Now she's the one who packs all the cards and mails them. I like to joke that she's my director of fulfillment.
That's kind of awesome.
She's actually really proud of me now. She's been able to, she prays for me every day because I'm sure she still thinks I'm going to hell for all this. However, she's really proud of the fact that I'm drawing beautiful pictures. Like, she has her own way of rationalizing that her daughter is not an evil witch with like long green fingers, that I'm actually someone that is making art and helping people. And, it's been wonderful to kind of watch her go through this process without me ever trying to have a big talk with her or having to say something like, Mom, I'm not a Christian. There's no point breaking an old lady's heart. She's 85. Why do I want to break her heart? I don't. So I've just let her draw her own conclusions.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe even as a Southern Baptist, she can embrace universalism.
We'll see. But yeah. Betty's all right.
Yeah. I think, that conversation with Storm about, being a witch in the world or, being an occult practitioner, whatever label you're using under your own name has challenges depending on where you are. Right. And how open you are. And it's, I have kind of been of the, I don't like bring it up every time I talk to somebody. I don't like blatantly say, oh, by the way, I'm a witch, but also if they ask me, I'm honest about it. I'm just like, this is who I am.
Yeah,
I got like,
where I'm at.
I hit 35 and I was like, I'm tired of pretending I'm somebody else to make people comfortable.
Yeah, it's the truth. So, It was really funny. We had an extended family Christmas, and my daughter and my son separately, they're both in their early 20s. They didn't plan this or do this. It was just funny that they both independently did this. Everyone was opening presents in the main living room. And my daughter pulled me aside and was like, Mom, I have a present for you, but I have to give it to you in the hallway because I don't want everyone to see it. And then my son too, Mom, I have a present for you, but I have to give it to you in the hallway. They both bought me, witchcraft related amazing gifts. But it was so funny. They didn't want to upset the aunts and uncles with like a dark magic book. It was so good.
That's really sweet.
Yeah.
But that's really sweet of them to like honor who you are as a person and understand that that's not going to be comfortable for everybody. That's really insightful for 20-year-olds. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, pretty great.
Yeah. Oh, if only I had been that circumspect in my 20s. But
I know. I was still figuring it out in my 20s, but that's all right. It got me here.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I am too. It's like I'm here. And talking about our ancestors, I think about, every single one of us that's walking around comes from a line of people who did what it took to survive. And I kind of feel like I, deserve to honor that for them too.
Yeah. I have a 5th great grandfather that I researched like crazy because part of my inquiry I felt was important to research a real slave owner in my family line. I wanted to just face that. I wanted to know everything that I could know about just if I could find one. And I did find one. And I tried to learn every single thing I could. And so I've actually been to their graves and I wouldn't speak to the grandfather. I just completely ignored him. And I only talked to the grandmother. And then I was able to figure out through my research what was the quote unquote Negro cemetery, but what was the actual resting place for, the enslaved members of the family. And I went and honored them and I brought them gifts, and I brought rocks and flowers and all these different things. And I thanked them, and I told them about the civil rights movement, and I told them about all these things. I told them that they have descendants who drive cars and have jobs and all these things. And it was really important to me to do that. But I spent so much time with them. And then I spent a little bit of time with the grandmother, and I spent no time with the grandfather. And just doing something like that was so edifying to me. It really sort of made them human for me, made them real.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I feel like you and I could probably talk for 2 days.
We could. And we should.
Definitely.
After this.
Yeah. But just for our, wrapping up in a certain amount of time. But Stacey, thank you so much for coming on. And I'm so glad we did this. And, I don't think you should have had any worries about, was it going to work with the format? Because I think we totally hit it. So it's perfect.
Well, it's a great podcast. You have a wonderful format. It would work.
Well, thank you.
It's awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Fold Press. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shanekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at witchlitpod. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.